Hello again. So we continue with the fourth and I hope final video on my review of the Book of Why by Judea Pearl. We have only two short chapters, well, not so short, two chapters left, number 9 and 10 in my overall impressions, which I already explained in the first video, but I can sum them up again here. So chapter 9 was about mediation. So mediators are like you have X and you have Y, and X influences Y, but there's a mediator in the middle. So it's logical to ask yourself, to study those mediators and to ask yourself to what degree is the effect that is being done by X on Y um, expanded on or restricted on by the mediator that's in the middle. That is to say, when you study, mediators are very important for studying counterfactuals, and again, we're at the third rung of the ladder of causation. Mediators give a second answer to why, and you can have, when you're studying effects, and there are mediators, you have basically total effects, direct effects, and indirect effects. So the total effects would be the sum of the direct effects and the indirect effects. The direct effects would be those between X and Y that don't go through the mediator, and the indirect effects would be the effects of X on Y that do go through the mediator. So this is a very difficult area. So you might be led to think, as a lot of researchers did, that calculating the total effect is just the direct effect plus the indirect effect. But you would be wrong, and you would be seriously mistaken. So this is a complex area, and the causal revolution of Judea Pearl has managed to untangle a lot of these difficult questions in the last years, apparently. So this chapter 9, starts with a study of scurvy, where an example is given of the wrong mediator. That is, acidity was taken to be the thing that preserved sailors from scurvy, but that was wrong. It wasn't sourness as such, it was vitamin C which was sour. So problems, these are non-trivial issues, like getting the wrong mediator probably contributed in a non-trivial way to the death of the Scott expedition to the South Pole, as they probably all died of scurvy because they didn't have enough citrus fruits or juice or vitamin C supplements in their diet. So that's a first example. As is usual in Judea Pearl's book, you have the example of a precursor that was ignored. In this case, it's a woman, Barbara Burks. So she discovers path diagrams by herself and collider bias. She unfortunately died very young and under painful circumstances. So her work wasn't really valued and recognized as it should have. So the problem with mediators is, as we said, non-trivial. There's a very famous example that I had found in another statistics book that I have over here, actually. This one, the Friedman Pisani Purps Statistics, 3rd edition. At the beginning of this book, there is an example of what is explained in this other book, the Berkeley Admissions Paradox. So this is a paradox in which, an experiment. Well, I'm not going to dwell into it, but basically, from looking at the data in the wrong way and without taking into account mediators, the appearance was that the university was discriminating Berkeley admissions, the departments were discriminating against women, whereas it was actually, to a certain degree, the opposite. They were discriminating in favor of women. This is a little bit like the Simpson paradox that we talked about in the previous video, but it would have been clarified with this is a causal diagram. There are two versions, Kruskal's and the simple version. But anyway, it's a type of problem that would have been more manageable and less, would appear less paradoxical using the tools of causal inference. Anyway, so we were saying, when you analyze effects when a mediator is present, you have the total effect, the direct effect, and the indirect effect. Let's start with the direct effect. The direct effect is relatively easy to deal with. I mean, you can use the do calculus, and you basically get at it by wiggling X and not allowing M, the mediator, to change. And well, then you have variations. There's the controlled direct effect, the CDE, but it's better to use the natural direct effect, the NDE, which incorporates counterfactuals. So this was difficult work, but the author managed to discover something called the mediation formula, and using this formula, you can compute with relative ease the NDEs, the natural direct effects. So no problem here. The indirect effect is more complicated. So for the indirect effect, you don't have a controlled version like for the direct effect. As obviously you cannot disable the main path with a fixed variable. You do have something similar to the other effect, to the natural direct effect. You have the natural indirect effect, NIE. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to be careful because the total effect is not necessarily equal to direct effect plus indirect effect, except when you're working with linear models that don't allow interactions. In that case, yeah, but those are the easy cases, if you wish. So for the more difficult cases, Judea Pearl struggled with the indirect effect, how unreal it felt, how it could be measured, and while disabling the direct effect. So this was very, very complicated. And he actually finds the key in what he calls the make-believe game, so the counterfactuality. Yeah, had the employee been of a different race and all other things the same, this sort of mental gymnastics gives you the idea. It gives you the key on how to solve this. So you have to play this make-believe game of counterfactuality. So for direct effect, we let the mediator choose a value for each individual in absence of treatment and fix it there. For the indirect effect, you deny treatment and let the mediator choose a value for each individual it would have in the presence of treatment. And well, basically you can use this to derive a mediation formula. And the book gives you 3 examples, also 3 case studies, algebra teaching, the tobacco gene and tourniquets, where these tools of the mediation formula are measured, and they give results. Okay, finally, chapter 10. Chapter 10 rounds up the book. It's a conclusion, and in chapter 10 you have some more general reflections of the author about big data, artificial intelligence, and big questions. So this chapter starts with an anomaly, which is the question of why couldn't AIs think causally? And this leads to the question of why didn't scientists work with this explicitly? And in fact, this is all the background that leads Judea Pearl to the causal revolution and his journey through causation. And well, the rest of the chapter is really a series of reflections on what the future holds. So ideas of the author. First is a massive expansion of big data. So the author believes that is going to happen. Well, this book was written a few years ago, but seems to have become true. He still thinks that the problem with big data is that it will fail to live up to its expectations, because after all, it's on round 1 of the ladder of causation. It's just accumulating data and using fancy statistical tools to process it. But without causality, it won't yield enough tools, or more than tools. It won't yield enough satisfactory results. It needs the causal models. He also believes there is a big scope for collaboration. So yeah, the author talks about finding patterns, overcoming dimensionality, transportability, stuff like that. So he explains that, AI research got stagnant in the 70s and 80s because it was based on rule-based systems. And there were these 2 big camps, those who wanted transparency, among whom he was, and those who just worried about efficiency. So a little bit like AI safety concerns today. The author discovered Bayesian networks, and he went on a causal route that took him away from artificial intelligence and machine learning and led to his work on causality. So the author talks about deep learning and he's pretty critical because that is, after all, the path of the camp of those who wanted efficiency but not transparency. And the main issue with deep learning is that it's AI as if it were in a dark box. So the programmer ignores how the AI does what it does, why and why it works, and this can have some pretty unsettling consequences, one can imagine, even if one is just worried in efficiency. But not being able to explain to a human how the machine is working and reaching the conclusions it reaches, that could be pretty fishy in the future. Anyway, the thesis of Judea Pearl, consonant with all that he has been saying in the book, is that strong AI needs to reflect and to learn from past actions, and therefore it will need to make counterfactuals and have intent. And, if it satisfies all these requirements, it will have free will. So the problem of free will is a long philosophical problem that is still unsolved even for humans today. So the author here is a compatibilist. That is, he believes that you can join together a certain freedom at the superior level with a certain determination at the lower level, maybe at the molecular, atomic, or neuronal level. We are not that free, but at the superstructural level of human consciousness, we do feel that we are free. And he makes some reflections about why has evolution endowed us with this notion of free will? Why is free will so important in our lives? How can we simulate it, free will in an artificial intelligence? And he basically says that free will allows us to see the difference between intents and acts, and to reflect and rationalize our actions, but at a really deep, at a really personal level. So we know that X didn't give the desired the result we expected. So what do? With free will, we can recalibrate for hypothetical, similar-like situations. So agency for AI will require that AIs have a causal word model plus a causal model of its own software, so that's the self-reflexivity, and a memory. And the author ends up on a pretty optimistic note. He believes this will be successful, and he is not too afraid of the dangers of agentic AI. So probably Eliezer Yudkowsky would completely disagree with this, and the whole field of AI alignment. Overall, a very good book. I recommend it to everybody, with just the caveats that I mentioned at the beginning. If you have taken a course on undergraduate statistics, you will probably understand much more of this and be able to profit more than I did. But, if you just are interested and follow the arguments, you will understand most of what the book says. You will have to reread some chapters carefully, but you will get the gist of it. And I think it's a very interesting book. And that will be all for this very long book review. Thank you for having watching all of it, for your patience.